Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the CSFL Kickoff Show podcast, joined by myself, Coach Fury, and today I have a brand new guest and a brand new GM on the show, and coming in fresh off of their appointment at the New York Jets in the CSFL, and that is not Zimmer. Welcome to the show, not Zimmer. I'm probably going to just call you Zimmer because it's just a little bit easier. But welcome very much for joining the show. New GM, obviously the Jets are out of the playoffs, but you're probably interested in casting an eye over this as you join the league. But be interested to sort of hear a little bit about your background and maybe a bit of a view on how you are going to take the Jets forward.
Yeah, thank you for having me. The Jets are kind of a nightmare right now. We'll see what we get in the draft. So I've been playing these games for quite a few years now, and I do a lot of testing and bother the devs on the forum all the time. So people who are familiar with the community probably know me from that. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing some of these matchups. We have some really interesting teams and a lot of different styles and approaches. So I think it's a really fun playoffs, and the CSFL in general just has a lot of really exciting simulated football going on.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's going to be fascinating. This playoffs in particular, and we have seen some really interesting games so far. And well, should we dive into it and talk about some of the games that we have seen to date in the playoffs, and maybe we'll talk into some of the games that are coming up in tomorrow's sim. So let's start at the top of the thing in terms of the NFC, and let's dive straight into the New York Giants against the Dallas Cowboys. A bit of an interdivisional rival play. Throughout the season, they were kind of going back and forth in terms of division title, and it was in fact the New York Jets who came out with this one in the end, and winning with I believe their third string quarterback in this one. But interested to get your thoughts. We've talked, I mean, on previous episodes you may not have seen, we've talked about the Giants probably being a bit of a dark horse in this season's playoffs and in terms of as a contender status. But interested in terms of your thoughts on the game and maybe where you feel the Giants are heading.
So I think the Giants are a really interesting team. Their GM has done an incredible job of turning the team around, from what I understand, from where they were last year and just historically. I think that the Cowboys, they have a really good defense, but I don't think their offense is really at a playoff competitive level at the moment, which isn't necessarily like meant to be a ding on the team or the roster. But the Giants are just so explosive. I mean, if you look at the box score, they had 318 passing yards with their third string quarterback. They had 123 rushing yards, a 4.4 average. Even with the 6 penalties for 60 yards, they controlled the time of possession with 37 minutes. Their offense is very dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure we'll talk about the Giants in a little while in terms of their playoff matchup coming up next. But let's talk a little bit about Dallas. So a bit of background for you, Zimmer, I guess, in terms of Dallas was taken over by the admins V Gorilla towards the middle to back end of last season. It kind of turned them around at that status to sort of being a team that was probably a bottom 3, bottom 4 team to now being in the playoffs. Obviously, unfortunately, got bumped out in the wild card round. But interested to get your thoughts on Dallas. I think they've had a pretty good season, and maybe this was a bit of an off night for them. In particular, Garoppolo had a pretty atrocious night all round.
Yeah, I like Dallas. I think they have a really interesting roster composition. But 0 for 12 on third downs is definitely indication that maybe you had an off night. And when I look at their stats overall as a team, they are 9th in points per game. So it's not like it's a terrible offense by any means, but 20th in passing yards per game, 17th in yards per game overall. So they're obviously a very efficient offense. I think that they need to find a way to, just be a little bit more consistent with their yardage gains.
Yeah, I mean,
in the future.
Yeah, I do agree. I think the big question I have for Dallas going into the off season is really, is Garoppolo going to be the future quarterback? I don't think he is. I think they will look to try and bring in someone of a better standing. I think they will look in that and explore that area. I mean, I'd be interested to see what they do in terms of trying to improve that receiving game as well, because that is something, as you mentioned, they do need to look at. But I think the transition both teams have had, if we talk about the Giants and the Cowboys from last season, even talking about the Cowboys from when V Grill took over to now, they both exploded a little bit, and it's going to be fascinating to see how that division plays out over the next couple of years, really, because they're both in pretty good positions to kind of go neck and neck with each other, I think. So let's move on to the other NFC game, which was a really fascinating one from my perspective. To give you again a bit of background, Zimmer, the Carolina Panthers are the reigning CSFL Super Bowl champions from last season, and they were up against a Seahawks team that was again probably a bottom 3 team last season, but got taken over by one of the perennial CSFL champions of all time, to be perfectly honest with you, in the likes of Skelter, who has won leagues all over the place. So there's no surprise the Seahawks have gone from a bottom 3 team to a playoff team, and this one was certainly neck and neck until the end. Let's start with the Seahawks, I guess. We understand that Skelter has decided to leave the league after this defeat. Do you think this brings this team back into a bit of a crisis situation now? They've lost such a perennial GM in the draft day sports pro football arena.
Yeah, I was really shocked by that. When I looked at the season that the Seahawks have had compared to the past, like as you mentioned, it's a complete turnaround, and they did great. They were 12-4 this year. And up until the very last couple of weeks, their defense, not only dominant in general, but were number 1 in points allowed per game. Just a really impressive season to decide to walk away from. It'll be interesting to see what another GM can do with the team. I mean, their roster, it looks pretty good. I'm a little worried about their depth at corner, but that's fixable. And obviously they need to do some work on the offense. You can't turn the whole team around at once. Jay Cutler's getting a little older, or Cutler. He's 33 now. And not a dominant quarterback. I think that if someone steps into this team, they can probably repeat the performance defensively.
I agree with you. I mean, I think it was just one of those games. They just got incredibly lucky. Incredibly unlucky, I should say, not lucky, in that they kind of had a bit of a falling from sort of the third quarter, start of the fourth quarter. That looks like that kind of essentially meant that they couldn't get this one over the line in the end, and they did have a late charge and managed to get it back within 3. But yeah, I think when you look at this game, if I would have taken Skelter and the Seahawks in possibly the Giants and the Cowboys game, they could be looking here at getting through the wild card. I think they're just incredibly unlucky in terms of the way the seeding works, in that they ran into the Super Bowl champions, in my opinion. I really don't know what to make of the Seahawks in terms of who may come in and what this team will look like next year. I think it's going to be a significant falling from where they are now. They are certainly not going to be up there at 12-4, I don't think, with the roster they have. So we'll wait and see.
They are in a friendly division.
They are, and that certainly will give them a sort of a helpful push, I guess. But I think it's a real shame, I think, that Skelter's gone. I think that team probably next year, with another season of him in charge, with possibly some roster moves, could have been a contender, probably, just because of the GMing ability there. So we move on to the Panthers. We move on to the Panthers, I guess. Super Bowl champions, getting the job done here against a tough opposition. Absolutely flying still on offense. I mean, we'll talk about their matchup in a minute, but I mean, I guess I'd be interested to get your reflections in terms of the Panthers this season. Obviously, losing out to the division, but been absolutely flying apart from that in terms of offense ability from last year. Are they in your book coming in? I guess looking at it as a new GM, are they still a contender for you?
I absolutely think that a contender. I think I'm a bit of a contrarian about their next game, against the Saints, but we'll get to that. They have a wide receiver duo that's just insane. I mean, drafting Allen Robinson last year and the season he's had, I think this was mentioned in your last video about this season, is just Allen Robinson has been incredible for them, and I think that has helped a lot. Their defense is obviously very good, but this passing game is scary, and I think they're actually like second in rushing touchdowns or something like that. They're third, or no, they're 10th in rushing yards, but they score a pretty surprising amount on the ground as well. And they're a really well balanced team, and that's dangerous against anybody.
Yeah, we'll talk about Robinson to begin with. If Robinson does not win Offensive Rookie of the Year, I seriously don't know why we're doing awards voting. The guy has just broken every rookie receiving record we have ever had. So look, it's been insane, and for the Panthers to draft someone like that with Cam Newton's throwing ability to a championship team from last year, that to me they're the team to beat still comfortably. But yeah, I think they had I think it was actually a really good thing in the sense that they had an early test here in the wildcard game against Seattle. I think when you've got a team like the Panthers, it's in a way it's nice to play against a one of the best ever GMs we've seen in this game ever early on, because it kind of gives them a bit of reassurance that if they can beat that roster and that strategy, then they're going to be in a really good position come when they play against maybe some of the more talented teams in the CSFL. But I think Kyrus is going to be cautiously optimistic, is what I would say about his chances this year, and we'll talk about the matchup they have next in a minute, because that's a fascinating one as well. But let's move on to the AFC now, and let's start with the Houston Texans against the Buffalo Bills. The Bills obviously got to the playoffs, to the Super Bowl last year. The Texans have been the team that I have touted for a couple of seasons now, as I'm just waiting for them to break out. They put up a pretty good fight against the Bills, didn't they, in this one, Zimmer?
They did, and I think they exposed a weakness in the Bills roster that I think going forward is going to be a huge problem for them. I'm actually kind of worried about the Bills going forward. But yeah, the Texans, they look great on paper. I mean, Andrew Luck is amazing. Their defense has played really well all season, despite having kind of a more middling pass rush. 11th in points per game allowed. I thought this was a really shocking game in some ways, because it looked, if you didn't see the box score right away and just watched it, you could have thought the Texans would come out with this one.
Yeah, and I honestly think maybe if Andrew Luck had a slightly better game in terms of his ability to kind of get the passing yards down, they could have come away with this one. And certainly if they'd have had average rushing yards, they'd have come away and won this one. I think in some of the plays I saw when watching this, they just couldn't get anything really going on the ground, and they really did try and play a balanced type of offense, but you can't get anything down the ground. It makes it much easier to kind of defend your offensive scheme. So yeah, I think I can finally say on one of my podcasts, I think the Texans are here now in the AFC, and I think they're going to be more competition next year once they probably will need to build a bit more of a better offensive line. I think maybe it'll help their rushing game. If they can get that up, that team could be incredibly scary next season. So massive congratulations to the Texans, and for me it's great to see a new team come into the playoffs and make some noise and sort of finally get over that hump, and Dijon, the Texans GM, certainly deserves a lot of credit for where he's taken this team from, again, being probably like a bottom 6 or so team to now being in the playoffs and really pushing the runners up from last year all the way really in this one.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think there's a couple GMs here who really turn teams around in ways that I can cross my fingers and hope I can do with the Jets, but we'll see.
Yeah, and there's one GM in particular that we do need to talk about later who has just completely done that to a fantastic standard, in my opinion. But anyway, let's talk about the Bills. So you said that you felt the Bills had a bit of a a weakness that maybe has been identified this season. And up to you whether you want to reveal that on the podcast or maybe reveal it after the if the Bills get knocked out, etc. We can come back to that one. But in terms of this one, they'll be breathing a bit of a sigh of relief that they got through against the Texans, managing to get that final touchdown in the fourth quarter to kind of just give them enough to hang on and win this one.
Yeah, so I think I don't have a problem with revealing it because I think there's not too much that can be done. I think their issue is offensive line talent. They're actually fourth in the league in sacks allowed. The Broncos are first in sacks allowed. So that stat by itself doesn't necessarily mean they won't get through. But if they're wanting to get to the Super Bowl, they have to get past the Broncos and they have to get past the Ravens. And those are two teams with absolutely incredible talent on the defensive line. And I think that there's a good chance the Broncos are just going to, sack them a ridiculous number of times. I mean, that was the problem for the Bills in the Texans game is 6 sacks. They had trouble getting their offense going.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've seen it time and time again. If your offensive line is not up to scratch in the AFC, there are some very, very good defensive teams in the AFC, and they will just run riot with you. And yeah, I think it's a very fair observation. Be interested to see how the Bills adapt to that, whether they maybe change their scheme to be a little bit quicker, and maybe Freeman's not holding the ball as much to maybe go as long as he has done in this regular season. Maybe they mix it up in that sense. But yeah, I mean, Bills have got through. I think Texans deserve a lot of credit for their performance this one, and we'll come back to that Bills observation a little bit later. But we'll move on to the final wildcard game, which was the Kansas City Chiefs against the Texans Titans. Not Texans Titans, what am I saying? Tennessee Titans. My goodness me, that's terrible. So the Chiefs are a team that I think we talked about on the previous podcast, and we've talked about throughout the season as a team that, the Chiefs are in the playoffs, but they've had a really easy schedule, blah, 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 blah. They took the Titans, who people have considered to be one of the most consistent teams in the CSFL, and the only team to date that has won 2 titles to within a point of their lives, really, in the end. So, again, the Tennessee had to come back with that late touchdown in the fourth quarter to get the job done. But focus on the Chiefs. For me, I'll say it now. For me, the biggest transition that this team has had is actually putting Bradford in at quarterback and actually bringing him in has just revolutionised this Kansas team. But I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts of, they pushed a really good team to within 1 point, and maybe even if the strength of schedule maybe was not as good as others, maybe this team needs to be taken seriously now.
Yeah, I think whenever you bring somebody in like a quarterback the quality of Bradford, that improves your contention chances. I think that for the Chiefs going forward, the challenge is going to be to become a little bit more balanced defensively. I think with Bradford, their offense is pretty good, 12th in points per game allowed, or in points per game, 13th in points per games allowed, but their linebacking core is pretty weak. And I think when you're looking at defensive compositions in this game, having a solid linebacking core is pretty important. I think that might even become more important if we go into the next version, for a couple of reasons that we probably don't need to get into here. But their best linebacker is a 78 overall. He only has 66 speed. Their fastest linebacker is a 76 speed player, and I think it's really difficult to deal with a team like the Titans, where their offense is kind of built around the running game, when your linebackers are limited like that. And they did a fantastic job of it. The game plan must have been really, really pretty great. But you look at the Titans' running game, their primary running back got 112 yards.
Yeah, I agree with the Chiefs. I think on the offensive side, I think they're as good as anyone now. In terms of strategy,
Definitely.
in terms of talent, in terms of offensive line, I really like what they've got going on that side. Next thing is, as you said, is to build that defense and be interested to see how they do that with some of the cap challenges that they may have. We'll see if they could be inventive in that space, because they have obviously maximised in other areas. But yeah, I'm excited to see how the Chiefs do next season. They can bring back everyone they've kind of more or less got Bradford. It's going to be fascinating to see if they can be that team that can push the Broncos in their division next year. But moving on to the Titans, I guess you talked about them in terms of their rushing game has just been electric as always. I've talked to death about Vince Young and how he is maybe not the right quarterback for this type of version of the game. Maybe in the next version he might be a bit better. But I mean, in terms of consistency, the Titans, they got through, they got the job done. I mean, do you feel that they have probably enough on paper to really make some noise this year, or do you think there's maybe something you've seen from a fresh perspective that maybe the Titans are just not quite at that level this year?
Well, I was lucky enough to be the Titans' assistant for a few weeks. It was great to work with Josh, and I really enjoyed that. And I'd love to say that I think the Titans can make a Super Bowl run. If I was cheering for a team, that would probably be the team. But they're facing a couple of really interesting challenges, and I don't think that they're likely to make a run this year. One thing to notice is both of their starting safeties are probably out. That's a big issue. To have that weakness back there, I think you're going to probably give up quite a few more big plays, miss some tackles in the running game, see some larger breakout runs against their next matchup, the Ravens. We'll talk about that later. But there is one interesting thing that I think should be looked at with Vince Young is recently he's posted some pretty good numbers for him. If you look at the season as a whole, he's only averaged 48% completion rate, which that's not really going to get you there. And their offense has maybe been a little bit anemic, despite having stellar defense, a great running game. But if you look at his completion percentage in this game and the numbers he posted up, they're fantastic. And a little earlier in the season, I think it was week 15. No, that was the horrible game against the Patriots. Let me find it here. Yeah, the game against the Colts. He also put up a 58.8% completion rate and had a pretty good game. So I think that it's possible Josh has figured something out with the passing game, or maybe he was saving something for the playoffs. So we'll have to see how that pans out.
Maybe. I certainly wouldn't put it past Josh to have something up his sleeve for the playoffs that he hasn't revealed during the regular season. That is textbook Tennessee Titans, if I have to say anything. So I wouldn't be surprised, and we'll see how that works. And maybe we should go straight into that game as we're talking about the Titans anyway, and with the AFC and talk about their matchup, because they are against again a former champion in Dennis in the Baltimore Ravens, a team that, similar to the Titans, has kind of always been there or thereabouts. Experienced core, pretty much established, not much transition from year to year. Basically dominated their division as expected, and again look like they're going to be a really, really good offensive and defensive team. Give us your breakdown for this game. I honestly can't call this one. It's going to be so close.
I hate to say this, but I actually strongly favor the Ravens in this matchup for a couple of reasons. One, the Titans are missing some key players on defense, and the way the Titans have won games all season has been to have a dominant defense and then control time of possession. And I think that they're going to struggle to do either of those things against this Ravens team. Not only do the Ravens have an incredible running game with, I think, 2-3 really very talented running backs, which makes it a lot harder to key on one. They actually split carries almost down the middle between Adrian Peterson and Morris, which is pretty interesting. And if you look at the Titans' strengths on defense, a lot like the Ravens, they both have kind of a weak running defense, which could go either way here. But I think with Joe Flacco, the Ravens are probably the more balanced offense overall, and I would almost favor them by 2 touchdowns here, as much as I hate to say it.
Okay, that's certainly a bold prediction, and I mean, I think for me, I think it's going to be really interesting. I think it's going to be closer because I think, based on both GMs, they've both played each other before. They understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. Maybe on talent, I think, as you said, because of the injuries, the Ravens are probably ahead in that respect. But I think Josh will have a few things up his sleeve for this one to keep it competitive at least. So I'm really interested to see this one. Two champions going against each other is always a fascinating matchup, whenever it is, but even more so in the playoffs because only one team can get through. So we'll see how that looks. And I do agree. I think if the Titans can stop that rushing game, or at least reduce it, then it might make it a bit more interesting because the Titans do have such a good pass defense. In terms of the Ravens, I think they probably do need to get to that point where they can just basically, again, similar. I think if they can shut down that rushing game, force the Titans in, force Vince Young to pass rather than do anything else, then they will have the advantage as well. But it's going to become down to, really, in my opinion, who gets that type of advantage early. If they can get up early, I think that might be enough to get this one over the line. I don't know. I don't know whether I see it a high scoring or low scoring game. To be honest with you, this one, I think it could go either way if there is just such a mismatch. But we'll see. We'll see how it works. I mean, you're saying the Ravens. I'm probably also saying the Ravens, but I'm probably saying it's slightly tighter than you are in this one.
Well, I hope so. I would like to see the Titans win.
So let's move on to the other AFC game then, and that is the Buffalo Bills against the Denver Broncos. Broncos, who have just had a phenomenal season to date, back to what we would consider their typical self. Great defense, high scoring, quick offense. It's all looking great for the Broncos. And you've got the Bills we talked about earlier with Toaster, who obviously got to the Super Bowl last year. Similar sort of team. How do you break this one down? You mentioned obviously earlier that the Bills probably have a bit of a weakness that could be exploited from the Broncos in terms of that offensive line. Do you think that's just going to be too much for the Bills to overcome in this one?
Well, I think it's pretty interesting. So if you look at the Denver Broncos defense as a whole, like I don't know if you want to pull up the screen on their cornerbacks or their dashboard, but their passing defense is actually giving up quite a few yards. But they're leading the leagues in sacks, and it's not even close. They're averaging like almost 4 sacks a game. And the Bills just came off a game where they gave up 6 sacks to Houston, and that really negatively impacted their defense. So Toasty's, really clever and a great GM. So if he can figure something out to try and limit that pass rush, I think that the Bills have a really solid chance. But I also think there's a possibility that Denver just rolls over them, and you just see crazy sack numbers out of the Denver Broncos defense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I would say in this one that I think will give the Bills a slightly better advantage is we know the Bills historically have been a team that's gone on the sort of the long passing. They've always gone long passing. Rushing has been their strategy in terms of offense. In terms of the Denver Broncos, they do have a lot of cornerbacks who might not play. So I'll give you the names. So you've got Chris Houston, Bryce McCain, Chris Rucker, and I believe Jonathan Joseph as well. All guys who probably would be in some sort of starting rotation for them. Might not make it. I mean, 3 of those guys are probable. 1 is definitely out. I mean, Chris Rucker's definitely not playing. If all of those guys don't play, and we know the logic of Draft Day Sports Pro Basketball, pro football, there is a bit of a dice roll in terms of whether these probable guys do actually play. If a couple of them don't play, then that might give the mismatch for the Bills in terms of maybe some of their wide receivers might be more open than they would be previously. Because if I look at the Denver team and I look at the actual cornerbacks outside of those guys who are injured, I'll just scroll to that position now, is they've still got some speed in there, but probably not the same type of guys in terms of the same type of personnel. So you're reliant on, Mikael Baker, who's a pace guy. Tackling's pretty good. Okay, he's going to be fine. Chris Willett is not a great tackler. Marcus Temple's not a great tackler. Neither is Ricardo Allen. They're all pace guys who've not got much in terms of strength or in terms of tackling or in terms of intelligence. So they might miss reads or they might miss routes, and it might just give the Bills a little bit of an advantage to maybe get a play or two, or a deep play or two that could come off and maybe just put some points on the board for them and put a bit of pressure on that Denver Broncos offense.
I agree. I mean, I think even when they're healthy, the Denver Broncos secondary, I hate to say that it's like like a serious weakness because this whole roster is obviously really good, but I don't think that their secondary is how they've been winning games defensively. I think it's been, their best cornerback is an 84 overall. When you look at the other top teams, their quarterback pairs are, I think, on average, significantly stronger. So it's really going to be all about, in my opinion, the pass rush and whether or not the Bills can deal with that and get those long shots, because those do take more game time.
Yeah, this is one of those. I don't know about you, Zimmer, but I could certainly see this being a very high scoring game. I could see this both teams putting up plus 30 something points and it just being a complete and utter fanfare to watch. Basically, I could see passing passing offense of both teams just clicking, just working through maybe injuries to the other opposition, or in terms of maybe not quite got the players there to kind of counter each other. I could see this being some sort of like crazy 35-42 sort of game, and when it gets to that, I mean, it is a bit of a dice roll. But for me, I still think the Broncos have enough, just because their rush defense is so good and their actual pass offense is still so dominating that I think if they go into that type of game, it's going to favour them. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that it's possible it's a shootout. I'm a little bit worried for the Bills because of how anemic their offense was in the game against Houston. Across the season they've been a pretty good offense, but it's a little bit spooky to see their wild card game where they only put up 17 points, which is significantly below their average of almost 30 points a game.
Yeah, so that's a very valid point. And the only other thing I would say that could swing this game on an actual knife edge would be that Chase Daniel is probable with fatigue for the Broncos, which means that he might not play. There is a small chance. I think it's very small in terms of fatigue, but it might mean that they have to rely on Kevin Kolb, who is not the exact same player as Chase Daniel. So if that happens, who knows what could happen in that game.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because if you look at the Broncos quarterbacks, I mean, they've had a lot of injuries this year, but I think they're the only team that has three quarterbacks with over 1,500 yards passing. And, Ryan Little and Kevin Kolb, despite their stat lines not looking that great, have actually managed to perform really well in this offense. If you look at Kevin Kolb's game analysis or his player stats, he's actually averaging 56.5% completion rate this year and has a pretty solid number of big plays for the number of attempts he has. So I think it's really impressive how the Broncos GM has managed to work around his quarterback injuries and maintain that number one league offense.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very valid point. I actually forgot Ryan Lindley was on the roster. I had to quickly look at that one. But yeah, who knows then? I don't know, actually. Maybe that won't be a factor. Maybe the system and scheme that Noah's running is enough to get the job done in that one. But I still, despite all that, I still favour the Broncos in that one. But I think it will be a high scoring game.
That's probably true.
So let's move on to the NFC. Let's start with for me, the really interesting matchup, which is the Carolina Panthers against the New Orleans Saints. And we talked a bit about the Panthers earlier. We'll come back to them. But the New Orleans Saints. So the suggestion that I made earlier in the show, that there was a GM that I thought just had an absolutely phenomenal season. And if he does not win, I will say this now, if he does not win GM and Coach of the Season, I seriously don't know what's wrong. But to turn around the New Orleans Saints, which was a bottom 3 team again last season, to winning the division against the Super Bowl champions from last year, if that is not a resume rubber stamp for winning GM and Coach of the Year, I honestly do not know what is. Zach has done an absolutely phenomenal job in changing his team. Carson Palmer is having the game, the season of his life. This is a team that won the division. They've now got a chance to again, have another stab at this Carolina Panthers team, and really, really make a statement in this playoffs. What's your take of the Saints, I guess, at the beginning of this season? And then really interested to hear your thoughts, Zimmer, on the actual matchup itself.
So I think this is the most fascinating matchup of the entire playoff round, and I actually pulled up some statistics specifically for this game because the Saints are a really fascinating team. I mean, Zach has done an incredible job, and I'd actually like to take a chance to look at that first matchup between the two teams in the season because it's interesting too. But if you look at the league average number of passing yards per catch, it's about 7.4 yards per catch, 7.5. The Saints are only giving up 5.17 yards per catch, which is significantly better than pretty much any other team in the league. And it's interesting about this pass defense because even though they're not getting very many interceptions, they're like in the middle of the league there, and they're actually towards the bottom in pass breakups, and they're tied for last in sacks. So stats that you normally associate with a good pass defense, they are such a quintessential bend don't break team that I think they're the number one passing defense in yards allowed, which is really impressive to me. And I think a lot of that goes down to their safety tandem. And if you take a look at that first matchup between the two teams, the Saints only allowed 8 completions and 20 attempts in that game. They lost the game, but they showed that they have the ability to dominate this Panthers team in pass defense when things go correctly. And I think in a lot of ways that's what's going to define the matchup, because the Panthers do have such an explosive passing offense with those incredible wide receivers.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think this is if there was any game out of the 4 in terms of the playoffs for the Sim tomorrow, this is the one to sit down and actually watch through. I think both GMs are having phenomenal seasons for consistency from the Panthers for winning the Super Bowl last year to carrying on that kind of offense ability to the Saints. And you've talked about their pass defense, but if you look at it in terms of one of the league's best, pass offenses against one of the league's best pass defenses, that's going to be fascinating to watch. Can the Saints slow down that Allen Robinson, Cam Newton, Odell Beckham sort of tandem that they have, or is that going to be too much for this team? I mean, how do you see this one playing out? What do you think the Panthers, on the other hand, need to do to kind of slow the Saints down? Because on the offensive side, the Saints have been just as good as the Panthers this season, really.
Right. I would say I favor the Saints. I think I'm in the minority in that category. I think that if you're looking at what the Panthers can do, one thing that really sticks out to me is Allen Robinson's been fantastic, but there's actually a pretty big matchup between Odell Beckham Jr. and the Saints' second best cornerback. And I think that how that matchup plays out could end up playing a pretty big role. Well, Beckham Jr. has a pretty big athletic advantage over the Saints' second best available cornerback. And I think that it's possible he'll have a big game. That didn't happen in the previous matchups, and I think I'm not going to guarantee that it will here, but I think that that's a matchup I'm going to be interested in seeing how that plays out.
Yeah, I honestly, I think it's very hard to go against even though the Saints took the division, it's just very hard to go against the previous champions, because they've had that, been there, done that stamp. They've added Allen Robinson, who has been phenomenal. So they've added talent to a roster that already had plenty of talent. Granted, some of it maybe has moved on since their win last year, but for me, I think the Panthers will win this. I think, again, it's going to be a really close game. I could see this one being a little bit tighter, though, than probably some of the other games we talked about. I mean, I think it'll be maybe a couple of 2 or 3 touchdowns each team. Probably will be it, but I could see this one being within 3 points of each other, 3 points. I think maybe an overtime game. I honestly don't know, but I'm still going to stick with the Panthers in this one. I just think they probably just have enough quality at some of the key positions that they need to just get over the line against this Saints team, which has really just had a phenomenal season as well. But me, the Panthers, I think.
If we can take a moment to talk about Carson Palmer's incredible season real quick.
Let's do it.
I think so. If you look at the percentage of deep shots he's taking, I think it actually leads the league. It's definitely the highest number of deep shots of any team in the top 5 quarterbacks. 36% of his passes so far have been deep attempts. And if you look at the number of big plays that he's had, he's got 98 completions for 20 plus yards, 17 for 40 plus yards. I think only your Matthew Stafford has any more in that category. And the passing game, the Saints with Zach taking over, has just been so explosive. I think it's hard to ever count the Saints out.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's hard to count the Saints out. And I think, as I said, I think it'll be a close game. I think Carson Palmer has just had a phenomenal season. And as you said in the analysis, he's really, really proven that if you can stop him getting sacked, basically he has enough about him at 37 years old to still be one of the elite quarterbacks in the league. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see how that game plays out. I still think Panthers, but yeah, as you said, I think Saints maybe have enough in the locker to at least really, really run the Panthers, I think, close. So that kind of moves us on to our last NFC game, which is the Detroit Lions against the New York Giants. So the Lions are obviously the division champions for their division this year, and then the Giants we talked about coming through in the wild card game. The Giants did beat the Lions in the regular season, but I guess I'm going to hand it over to you at this point because obviously I am the Lions GM, and so I'm just going to let you just essentially talk through this matchup and give us your views on this one.
Oh, I mean, I think you'll probably have more insights than me, but obviously your Lions are the most talented team in the league, and I think nobody ever forgets that. If you look at the Lions roster, it's basically loaded to the gills at every position. But the Giants are incredibly explosive, and I don't want to use the term lucky because I think their GM has done a great job with the team, but I think they have to some extent been very lucky. If you look at the turnover differential stats, it's actually kind of an interesting comparison between these two teams. Your team, the Lions, actually have the worst turnover differential at -2. Your team has not generated very many turnovers and given the ball away a little bit. The Giants, on the other hand, plus 27 in turnover differential, which is, a huge leap. And they've forced a lot of turnovers, and they've only, I think, had 5 turnovers themselves the entire season, which, as much as the GM has done an incredible job, I think to some extent when you only have 5 turnovers in a season, there's a little bit of luck there. 5 turnovers. 32 forced turnovers. I think that in order for the Giants to beat the Lions, first of all, I think it'll need to be a shootout like it was last time. I think the Giants had 37 points, and I think you were at 31. So I think it's going to have to be another shootout. Eli Manning is going to have to actually play. I know that he's questionable. Yep, questionable right now. So that'll be a big deal, and I think that the Giants are going to have to get some turnover luck like they've had all season. But I heavily favor the Lions here, and I think pretty much everyone else does too, just based on talent and the balance of the roster at the moment.
Yeah, okay. Interesting observation, I think, on this game. I think, as you said, key one is going to be whether Arian Foster and Eli Manning are actually able to play for the Giants. I think if they're able to play, makes this matchup very, very interesting, just given the regular season performance of the Giants as well against the Lions. So we'll see how that one plays out. So that brings us to a close in terms of the playoff games that we are looking forward to for tomorrow's sim. I guess we can probably close out. Zimmer, have you got any sort of favourite in terms of who you think will take the title this year? Obviously, if you don't, you can sit on the fence. I'm not going to push you on that one. Or have you got a team that maybe you feel is a real dark horse to maybe win the title out of these remaining 8 teams?
I think that my favorite for the Super Bowl game is probably actually Saints-Ravens. I think that in my mind, the Ravens are pretty clearly probably the team that comes out of the AFC. I think that if we see a Saints-Lions game, it's a real toss-up, and I wouldn't even try to predict that game. But I would like to say Saints just because it's a pretty incredible story to see them turn around like that and then come into the Super Bowl. As far as a favorite to actually win the game, I think it'd be really tough to pick. I think if it's Ravens Lions or Ravens Saints, I have no clue who would win either of those games. To be honest with you, I think they'll probably both be completely insane.
Yeah, I think they're two valid candidates in the Saints and the Ravens. I think it would be absolutely fascinating if the Saints did manage to go all the way, just given that Zach couldn't get over that line in Green Bay with arguably probably a better talented team. And if he manages to do it with the Saints, well, I mean, that just blows my mind just thinking about that possibility, to be honest with you. But yeah, it's going to be fantastic. We're going to see 8 really, really good games here, I think. It's going to be fantastic to watch. We'll see what happens. I'm sure we'll all be sitting there come tomorrow and going, oh my goodness me, can you believe this game or that game? But Zimmer, it's been great, absolutely great to have you on the show. Welcome to the league.
Thank you.
Best of luck with the New York Jets in the off season and in next season. And I'm sure we'll be back in the future to talk about playoffs, draft, maybe more Jets stories. Who knows? But thank you very much for coming on, and we will see what happens tomorrow.
Thank you.